Hey, folks, welcome to Phantoms and Monsters Radio. Now, West Virginia has always occupied a strange place in America's paranormal landscape. It is a state of deep valleys, isolated mountain roads, old coal towns, abandoned rail lines, dark forest, and ridges that seem to hold memory. It is a place where history and hardship are pressed into the land itself, where generations of witnesses had described things that do not fit comfortably in any single category. Now, most people know West Virginia because of Mothman. Point Pleasant became part of the American folklore after the strange sightings of winged humanoids in the 1960s, but Mothman is only one chapter in a much larger book. Now, across the state, people have reported towering figures in the woods, strange black-eyed children at doors, cloaked beings, impossible animals, winged omens, and entities that seem to exist somewhere between alien cryptid, spirit, and something far older. Now, tonight we're going deep into these reports. These are accounts from the mountains, backroads, forest, mining communities, and quiet neighborhoods of West Virginia and the greater Appalachian borderland. This is Unexplained West Virginia. Now, what do you do when the thing reaching out to you in the forest is not entirely human, not entirely animal, and not quite alien in the usual sense, but something thin, green, and plant-like, with needle-sharp fingers that seem to draw strength from your body? Now, in August 1968, 28-year-old Jennings Frederick of Fairmont, West Virginia, claimed that he encountered one of the strangest humanoid entities ever reported in American UFO folklore. The case would later become known as the legend of the Vegetable Man, a bizarre encounter that blends alien contact, energy vampirism, Appalachian weirdness, and the unsettling possibility of a biological or plant-like intelligence. The incident reportedly occurred near Grantown, West Virginia, a rural Marion County community surrounded by wooded hills and thick Appalachian forest. Frederick said he had been out hunting when he suddenly heard a sharp, high-pitched sound in the woods. It was unlike any animal call he recognized. and it seemed to pull his attention deeper into the trees. And as he moved toward the source of the sound, Frederick claimed he came face to face with something extraordinary. Now, the being was described as thin and humanoid with an elongated body and greenish skin. It did not resemble the metallic-suited space beings often described in UFO reports of that period. Instead, this entity seemed organic, almost vegetable. Its body appeared narrow and plant-like, with long, slender arms and hands tipped with needle-like fingers. Its eyes were large and unsettling, giving the witness the impression that this was an intelligent creature, though not one that belonged in the familiar natural order. Now, before Frederick could fully react, the entity allegedly reached towards him. Its long fingers fastened onto its hand like living syringes. Frederick said he felt them pierce or latch into him, and almost immediately a voice entered his mind. The communication was not spoken aloud, it was telepathic. So according to Frederick, the entity's message was calm and almost apologetic. It allegedly told him that it did not intend to harm him, but that it needed substance. That substance, according to the being, was energy drawn directly from Frederick's body. Now, Frederick later described the sensation as if the creature was draining his life force. He felt weak, dazed, and physically depleted as the needle-like fingers remained attached to his hand. Now, the encounter lasted only moments, but to Frederick, the experience was overwhelming. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the entity released him. The high-pitched sound faded. The strange green humanoid withdrew into the forest. Frederick was left alone in the West Virginia woods, shaken by an encounter that defied every ordinary explanation. For a time, Frederick reportedly kept the experience to himself, fearing ridicule and disbelief. Now, the account eventually reached Gray Barker, the well-known West Virginia UFO writer and promoter, whose work helped shape much of the region's mid-20th century UFO folklore. Barker circulated the story through UFO circles, and over time, the Granttown encounter took on a life of its own. Now, unlike Mothman, Bigfoot, or other recurring West Virginia anomalies, the Vegetable Man does not appear to have generated a wave of matching reports. It remained largely a singular case, a one-off encounter so bizarre that it stands apart even within Fortean history. That singularity is part of what makes it so compelling. The Vegetable Man seems to occupy a strange borderland between several categories. It has elements of a close encounter, but the being does not fit the usual extraterrestrial template. It has elements of psychic attack or energy vampirism, yet the entity reportedly communicated with a strange sense of necessity rather than malice. It also carries the flavor of old Appalachian forest lore, where the wilderness is never entirely passive and the things that live within it may not always be known to us. Now, was Jennings Frederick the victim of a hoax, hallucination, misidentification, or an authentic encounter with something truly anomalous? There's no final answer. But the image remains disturbing. A lone hunter in the West Virginia woods, a high-pitched cry pulling him through the trees, and a thin green humanoid reaching out with needle-like fingers to feed on human energy. Whatever the Vegetable Man was, his place in West Virginia's paranormal history is secure. It is one of the state's strangest and most eccentric Fortean legends, a case that continues to trouble the boundary between alien visitation, psychic parasitism, and deeper mysteries of the Appalachian wilderness. Now, the Vegetable Man is one of those cases that seems to come from nowhere, leaving no clear pattern behind it. But West Virginia's strange history is not limited to humanoids in the forest. Sometimes the unexplained appears as a warning, something seen just before tragedy and remembered for a lifetime. Our next account takes us back to December 1934 to the coal fields of Fayette County, where a young girl's father saw something enormous in the sky just days before disaster struck. So she wrote, "Hello, sir. A friend referred me to your articles about strange occurrences in West Virginia. The Mothman encounters stir memories of an incident from when I was a girl. The strangest incident took place near Powelton, West Virginia, in December 1934. I was 8 years old at the time. My father worked for Elkhorn Piney Coal in McDunn. He and the other miners would take a train to the mine each day. The day before Christmas Eve, my father mentioned an unusual sighting that he and other men on the train had witnessed while traveling back to Powelton from the mine that evening. And as they looked east, they noticed a very large bird flying above the trees." Now, my father was a very simple man, did not believe in nonsense, but this large bird really caught his attention. He described it as a freakish-sized owl, very dark in color. Now, the sky was getting dark, but they could still make out the large form. He said it looked toward the train as it flew over the trees. Nobody in the train could figure out what it was. The mere fact that my father even mentioned it suggested that it must have been something very unusual. Now, my father was scheduled to be off work for 3 days during the Christmas holiday. On December 27th, he was getting ready for work, but he said he felt poorly. My mother became concerned because he had a high fever and awful chills. She insisted that he stay home and telephone the doctor. Now, my father was reluctant to stay home and put up a good argument, but my mother was not going to back down. She put him to bed and waited for the doctor. We waited for hours. Then the phone rang. The operator told my mother that the doctor was at McDunn. There had been a horrible train explosion. She could not talk long, but said the doctor's wife had asked her to contact us. My mother was pale when she told my father what had happened. I remember they both started praying and crying. Now, for years, both believed that the large bird was an angel sent by God as a warning and that my father's life had been saved for a reason. My father never went back to the mine. It turned out that he had contracted polio, though he was very lucky and survived it with only a slight limp. We soon moved away to a small town in Kentucky where my father found his calling and became a Pentecostal preacher. He told his story of survival to anyone who would listen until the day he died. I happened to read your stories while looking online with my great-grandson. I always assumed my father saw something more divine. That is what he always believed. I'm not so sure now. Thank you, sir. Emma. Now, the disaster Emma referred to was the locomotive boiler explosion at McDunn, West Virginia, on December 27, 1934. A boiler on the locomotive hauling mine workers exploded, resulting in the death of 18 miners. The strange part of the story is not simply that a large winged creature was seen. It is that it was seen by multiple men on a train shortly before the tragedy, and that one of these men, who might otherwise have been on that train, was prevented from going to work by sudden illness. Now, to Emma's family, the answer was clear. The creature was not a monster. It was not a bad omen. It was an angelic warning. Others may see echoes of the Mothman pattern, a huge dark winged form seen before catastrophe linked to memory of death, fate, and survival. Whether an angel, an omen, or unknown bird, or something else entirely, the sighting stayed with the family for generations. Now, West Virginia's winged mysteries have often carried an emotional charge. They're not always described as attacks or threats. Sometimes they're remembered as warnings. But the next account is very different. This one comes from Jefferson County near Harpers Ferry. It involves teenagers, a bonfire, a mountain clearing, and a tall, motionless figure standing at the edge of the trees. The witness wrote, "Hi, I live in Jefferson County, West Virginia, near Harpers Ferry. When I was a teenager in high school, we used to throw parties on top of a mountain in a big clearing in the woods. There were about 12 to 15 of us there one night with a good-sized bonfire. Our vehicles were parked around it, forming a kind of a semicircle. My friend and I were sitting in his car when the event happened. Before I get into it, understand that we were about 16 to 18 years old, just typical young and dumb West Virginia teenagers. Now, I was in the passenger seat and my friend was in the driver's seat. He happened to look up and something caught his eye in the tree line in front of us, past the bonfire, about 15 foot away. I was looking down at the time when I heard him say, 'Dude, what is that?' I looked up and asked, 'Where?' At first, I didn't see anything. He pointed it out to me, and then I instantly made out the silhouette of something unnatural. It was a dark night, but the shape stood out against the firelight. I said, 'What is that?' Then he turned on his car headlights. I still remember the thing vividly. It appeared to be about 7 to 8 foot tall, humanoid, and extremely skinny. I could see its bone structure. It had long, skinny legs and long arms. I couldn't see its eyes. It was as if they were sunken in and covered by grayish, ashen-colored skin. When I looked at this thing, I felt a sense of fear I had never felt before, and to this day, I never felt anything like it again. I was speechless. My friend somehow managed to roll down his window and alert everyone else who was there. All we heard were girls screaming and kids scattering. Everyone ran back to their vehicles and peeled out. The thing never moved. It stood there the whole time. Now, as I said before, we were not the type to get scared. Most of us were armed, but not one single person wanted any part of that thing. So at school, we told the story and nicknamed it the Stickman. I did some research online, Googled the description, and thought that what we saw looked like a Wendigo. I was honestly shocked when I saw some drawings of Wendigos because a few of them closely resembled that thing. I had never seen or ever heard the word Wendigo before this happened. In my opinion, I doubt that this was a Wendigo in the traditional sense. The description sounds closer to what many witnesses today refer to as crawler-type humanoids, tall, pale, or grayish, extremely thin with elongated limbs, and a presence that triggers immediate primal fear. What stands out in this report is the number of witnesses. This was not one person alone in the woods. There were multiple teenagers present, vehicles, firelights, and even visibility for the figure to be seen against the tree line. The entity did not chase him. It did not focalize. It did not move. It simply stood there and watched. And sometimes that's even more disturbing. Now, the Stickman case presents the woods as a place where humanoid forms can appear without warning, silent, and almost deliberately positioned to be seen. Now, the next report moves into stranger territory. It involves a hunter, a buck that seemed too intelligent, and a firearm that refused to fire, and an animal that allegedly rose onto its hind legs and charged like something out of ancient folklore. Now, the witness writes, "This happened in West Virginia about 10 years ago. I have done my best to stuff the memory deep down, but I accidentally watched a video on YouTube that basically re-traumatized me. What the presenter said really freaked me out and brought this memory back. She discussed deer guides and encounters with interdimensional beings. Now, when I was 22, I went hunting with my dad and uncle. We each had our own deer stand and blind on private hunting ground that my uncle owned. About halfway through the morning hunt, a big buck strode into my view, but it did not look quite right. Not in a sick way, not in a mentally ill way. His eyes were more human-like. They looked as if they contained far more intelligence than they should have. I put my gun to my eye to aim, and the buck stopped cold. I swear he was looking directly at me. He knew. Then, when I took the shot, my trusted gun wouldn't fire. In a scramble, I checked my gun. It was fine, but it would not shoot. The deer just stood there and kept staring at me. Then on my second check of the gun, I got a weird and eerie feeling. When I looked back up, the thing was standing on its hind legs and staring at me. I froze. It started charging, running on its hind legs at full speed directly toward my stand. I left everything and fell about halfway down the ladder. I know I messed up my ankle that day, and I didn't care. I was terrified. I would hear the footsteps running toward me, and I ran as fast as I could. Maybe about a fourth of the way to my dad's blind, I looked behind me because I could still hear the footsteps right on my heels, but there was nothing there. The running steps chased me almost until I reached the blind. My dad thought I had been shot or something because of how I was acting and breathing. He carried me to the truck, and when I calmed down, he told me that he had heard other similar stories in the area. Now, I have not gone into the woods or hunted since. That was 10 years ago, and until now, I hadn't known what to do with the experience. I have been watching and listening to paranormal shows since then, trying to make sense of it. But just last week, I watched the YouTube video about deer and their relation to death, gods, 14 theories, and the like. Since watching that episode, I've been messing up things that I was trying to kill a deer god, and that why the buck chased me. The presenter had some interesting points and an interdimensional theory. It might have been put in some pieces together for me. But should I go to those woods and apologize? I'm still paralyzed with fear about it, and I'm not trying to make enemies, especially with some wild god. What should I do? This is a very unusual account. Deer have deep symbolic meaning across many cultures and folk traditions. They can represent the forest, the hunt, transformation, death, spirit messengers, and boundary crossing between worlds. But from a Fortean standpoint, this case has several details worth noting. First, the witness describes the animal's eyes as unusually intelligent and almost human. Second, the firearm did not discharge, despite the witness's belief that it was functioning properly. Third, the deer allegedly rose on its hind legs and charged in a manner that should not have been physically normal. Fourth, the witness heard footsteps in pursuit even after the animal could no longer be seen. Now, that last detail is important. In many anomalous encounters, the sound continues after the visible form disappears. Footsteps, breathing, movement through the brush, or pursuit sounds continue beyond what the witness could physically account for. Was this a misperceived deer encounter amplified by fear? Was there another animal involved? Was it a neurological or psychological response to the stressful moment? Or did the witness encounter something using the form of a deer, something tied to older Appalachian wilderness lore? I can't say. But I do not believe the witness needs to return to the woods in fear or seek forgiveness from the entity. If this was an anomalous encounter, the message may have already been delivered. The witness was warned away, and they listened. Now, from strange deer to unseen presences, the West Virginia woods often seem to produce encounters that are not only visual, but also psychological. People feel watched, they hear movement, they sense intention. Now, our next report comes from the Seneca Creek and Spruce Knob backcountry in Monongahela National Forest, where two hikers endured terrible weather, darkness, and the unnerving sense that something was following them through the woods. So the witness wrote to me, August 10th to the 11th, 2020. I was on a backpacking excursion with one other person in Seneca Creek and Spruce Knob backcountry in West Virginia. Now, what was supposed to be a 3-day, 2-night, 16-mile outing turned into a day-and-a-half, 20-mile mistake because of terrible weather and admittedly some poor decision-making on our part. That Sunday, we ended up hiking 18 miles to get back to the trailhead. The last 5 miles were in torrential rain and darkness on the Huckleberry Trail. Now, about 3 miles before we reached the trailhead, I started hearing loud branches cracking to my left. I was leading, if that matters. It was easy to blame it on the weather, but the farther we walked, the louder and closer it seemed to get. It was almost as though I could hear heavy footsteps, but the wind and rain were torrential, so who knows? I kept quickly turning toward the trees with my headlamp illuminating the thick spruce, hoping I would see something, but I never caught sight of anything. Now, about half a mile from the trailhead, I suddenly realized I no longer felt watched, and the noises I had been hearing just stopped. If anything, the weather had gotten worse, so at that point, I felt even more like it was not weather-related. If I had to guess, the feeling of being followed lasted a little over 2 miles. Now, for context, I'm an avid hunter in Virginia, West Virginia, in Maryland and Pennsylvania, and I've been for years. Almost all the time I hike alone. This was the first time in years of hiking that I ever felt like I was being watched or followed. Now, the next day after I was home and had time to process how terrible the whole trip had been, it hit me that I felt we were being escorted out of the woods. Given the terrible weather, we had not passed anyone for miles. Not another soul seemed to be out there, and all the campsites we passed were vacant. I never felt like we were in danger exactly, but I felt that something wanted to make sure we left the backcountry. Again, I never actually saw or smelled anything. It was all noise and feelings. And I never felt like we were in any danger. I just felt uneasy. Now, I did not mention this in my hike to my hiking partner, mostly because I had made an offhand joke about Bigfoot hours earlier. And she became very serious in criticizing people who think Bigfoot is real. I knew there would be no support there. So I made the joke when she said she heard bongo drums out of nowhere. I didn't hear that sound, although a few times I did hear what I thought were wood knocks. One final thing to note is that I had an experience about 30 miles north of here in Davis, West Virginia, back in 2013. I was driving with someone around 1 a.m. on our way to a cabin. And as we rounded a curve, I swear I saw a Bigfoot on the side of the road heading up the embankment into the woods. It stopped briefly when illuminated by the headlights. I remember thinking he looked startled. I also remember immediately thinking, wow, he's a lot shaggier than I thought he would be. The hair or fur was deep auburn color. My friend happened to be looking down at her phone, but I screamed and slammed on our brakes. I remember shaking and being unable to explain to her what I had seen. I could not believe what I thought I saw. That encounter lasted no more than 3 seconds. These are the only 2 instances of a potential encounter that I've had in my life. I'm wondering if anyone had had similar experiences in Seneca Creek and Spruce Knob area or anywhere in the Monongahela National Forest. Or if you think this is possible, that it could have been a Bigfoot making sure we left the woods. Now, this is one of those reports where the witness is careful, grounded, and reluctant to overstate the case. She does not claim to have seen the creature during the 2020 backcountry incident. She does not claim an attack, and she does not embellish. But several details are significant. The noises were described as heavy, close, and persistent. The feeling of being watched or followed lasted for over 2 miles. The sensation ended before reaching the trailhead, almost as if whatever was nearby had reached a boundary or completed a task. The witness' interpretation of after reflection was not that she was hunted, but that she was escorted out. That is a recurring theme in some Bigfoot and forest entity encounters or reports. The presence does not always behave like a predator. Sometimes it behaves like a guardian, a territorial intelligence, or something attempting to move people away from a particular area. The mention of bongo-like sounds, possibly wood knocks, in the earlier Davis, West Virginia sighting of a shaggy auburn figure gives this account added context. Now, Monongahela National Forest has long been a region of strange reports. Now, whether this was a Bigfoot activity, environmental misinterpretation, and extreme weather, or something else entirely, the witness came away with the impression that the forest itself had made a decision. It wanted them out. Now, the Monongahela region appears again in the next account, but this time the witness and his brother saw something directly. What began as an overnight backpacking trip near a mountain lake became a terrifying encounter with a towering figure, glowing golden eyes, and a scream that drove both men out of the woods. So the witness wrote, in 2017, I was backpacking with my brother in the mountains of West Virginia. To get to our destination, we had to drive for about 2 hours along a very long, deep-ditched road. After reaching the mountain, we got all our gear out of the car and started our hour-long hike into the woods. Now, our destination was at the edge of a small lake. Behind us was a long path back to the car, covered by fallen trees, thick brush. The area was surrounded by high, jagged cliffs. After about an hour of resting, we set up camp and started a fire. We cooked as the sun set over the large rock walls across the lake from us. Just after the sun went down, the strangest began. Every half hour or so, my brother would hear what he said was soft footsteps coming from the trail behind us. I was tired and keep blowing it off as a joke. However, as the night passed, he refused to stop talking about what he was hearing. I told him to shut up because I was tired of hearing it. At around 11 p.m., the situation became more bizarre. I had nodded off with my head propped on a log. Suddenly, a large crash could be heard from across the lake. My brother and I both got to our feet, grabbed our shotgun and a .44 Magnum, and walked to the edge of the lake to see if we could spot what had made the noise. Now, after a minute of staring into the pitch black night, we decided to go back and lie down. We both thought it must have been a loose boulder that had fallen off the face of the ridge. That was until my brother told me to stop in an abrupt whisper. "Look there," he said, pointing toward the ridge to our left. That was when I realized my brother really had been hearing things all night. About 100 yards away from us, in the tree line, stood a figure that appeared to be at least 10 foot tall with golden, glowing eyes. Paralyzed with fear, my brother and I watched as the large figure swayed back and forth, never taking its eyes off us. "Let's get the hell out of here," my brother yelled while shooting around from his .44 Magnum into the lake. At that point, the figure stopped and stared. Its eyes seemed to get larger and brighter. Then, just as quickly, the eyes were gone. We immediately started stoking the fire as fast as we could, not knowing that the figure would return. We decided to stay up all night, taking turns adding logs to the fire. After an hour or so, we heard a faint rustling in the brush. Then the rustling stopped. Then, all of a sudden, this thing roared out, the most terrible scream I'd ever heard. We grabbed our guns and gears. It was time to leave. We both sprinted into the darkness with our lights off. We ran into the woods for at least 10 minutes until both of us were out of breath and had to stop. We turned on our lights to find a path and listened for the creature. It was moving towards us. We could hear the pounding of footsteps and the snapping of branches. This time, the lights stayed on as we ran nonstop, tripping over obstacles until we reached the car. We threw our gear into the vehicle and locked the doors behind us. My brother was shaking with fear and fumbling with his keys. Just as we got the keys in the ignition, a loud scream blasted from the darkness. He started the car and gunned it. I do not know what this thing was. All I could say is that I will never return to those woods to find out. Now, I was eventually able to contact the witness, and based on the information he provided, I believe the area was in the higher regions of the Monongahela National Forest, possibly near Golden Ear Knob or Bald Knob. The incident occurred in the summer of 2017. My initial impression is that this may have been a Bigfoot encounter, though I would not completely rule out an upright canine because of the reported eye color and aggressive pursuit behavior. There are historical reports of both in the general region. Several details stand out. The footsteps began before the visual sightings, suggesting the brothers may have been observed or followed from the beginning. The figure was extremely tall, approximately 10 foot, and positioned at a tree line. The swaying motion appears in several Sasquatch-related accounts, though it's not exclusive to them. Now, the scream and the sound of pursuit and the timing of the final roar near the vehicle all suggest either territorial intimidation or a deliberate attempt to drive the witnesses out. This was not a passive sighting. This was an encounter where the witnesses felt forced to flee. Now, the Monongahela reports give us a classic Appalachian wilderness pattern: footsteps, watching large figures, screams, and territorial behavior. But the next account comes from a broader Appalachian borderland in rural southwest Virginia, near West Virginia. I'm including it because it fits the same mountain corridor and because the witness describes something that may connect to a much older fear: the full moon, the human-like scream, and a massive black wolf-like creature that did not move like an ordinary dog. So the witness writes, these two incidents happened almost a decade apart, and for obvious reasons, I cannot guarantee they are related at all, but it seems reasonable to at least entertain the idea. Now, the first story takes place at my cousin's trailer a couple houses down from mine. We live in a rural town at the foot of the Appalachian region in southwest Virginia, so there's plenty of forest coverage around us. We were playing hide and seek, and all was well until I tagged my cousin, making him the seeker. He hated seeking, so instead of playing the game, he decided to quit and sit on the front porch. It was around midnight, maybe a little earlier, so naturally it was a pitch black outside, perfect for scaring someone. Now, my cousin's friend, my brother, and I came up with a plan to get revenge on my cousin for being a sore loser. We would lure him to the edge of the forest, and my brother would jump out at him. It was a very simple plan for a couple of dumb 13-year-old kids. We managed to convince them that something was making noises in the woods, so he came with us to investigate. And as we walked along the edge of the forest, we heard something inside walking with us. I looked at my cousin's friend, and we were both grinning, thinking it was my brother beyond the trees. But then, out of nowhere, my brother burst out from the side of my cousin's trailer, screaming and roaring, sending us all into a fearful panic. He got us good. So good, in fact, that we forgot about the noise coming from the forest, which could no longer be blamed on my brother. As we were all laughing about the scare, we heard a horrifying noise coming from the depths of the forest behind us. It was a scream, like a man screaming for help. It slowly changed pitch, and to this day, I swear it said, "Help." After about 5 seconds of human-sounding screams, it turned into the most guttural roar I had ever personally heard. It was chilling. We ran inside, and my cousin opened the blinds to the windows. That was when we noticed the obvious and haunting sight of the full moon. Yes, we do not know what could have made that noise. Yes, there are farms around. It could have been a cow being attacked by coyotes, or pretty much anything that happens in rural America. But I've never heard anything like it before or since. Now, fast forward about 9 years to 2013. I was coming home late from work. As I was driving, I saw two bright orange eyes peering at me from the side of a dark road. I thought it might have been a fox or a dog, but as I got closer, I realized it was no average fox or dog. It was a massive black wolf-like dog. This animal was so tall on all fours that it seemed almost as tall as my car. Its back legs were almost kangaroo-like, very long and muscular, while the front legs were short and thin. It dashed across the road and in front of my car, then jumped the fence to the left of the road without much struggle. When I got home, I nonchalantly told my family that I had finally seen the werewolf that made that noise so many years previous. Now, I do not necessarily believe it was the actual werewolf, but I cannot honestly say it wasn't. Keep a keen eye out on full moon nights. So this account outside West Virginia proper, but it belongs in the greater Appalachian borderland pattern. The first event is primarily auditory, a human-like cry that allegedly sounded like a plea for help, transforming into a guttural roar. The second event, 9 years later, involved a large black wolf-like animal with abnormal proportions, orange eyes, and powerful fence-clearing leaps. There are possible mundane explanations for parts of this report. Rural sounds carry strange at night. Injured animals can produce shocking vocalizations. Foxes, coyote, cattle, and predators can create sounds that seem human under certain conditions. But the latter sighting complicates the story. The witness does not describe a normal wolf, dog, coyote, or fox. The body proportions sound unusual, very tall on all fours with powerful rear legs and shorter front legs. That configuration appears in some upright canine and dogman reports, particularly when the witness sees the creature in a quadrupedal position before it moves away. Now, the full moon detail lends the account as a folkloric charge, but the more important elements are the witness's memory, the unusual vocalization in the later sightings of a massive black canine-like creature in the same general area. Whether the two events were connected or not, the report captures something that reoccurs in Appalachian creature lore. The voice from the woods that sounds almost human follows years later by the sound of something that shouldn't exist. Now, from wolf-like creatures and mountain screams, we now move to a different kind of anomaly. Not large, not aggressive, and not easy to characterize. This next report comes from Beaver, West Virginia, where a witness saw something only a few inches tall crossing the road, something cloaked, stick-like, and shimmering in a way that reminded her of the predator effect. So the witness wrote, "I recently found your blog and was curious about the Glimmer Man incident you have written about. I had a similar encounter several years ago. I'm curious what you think." The date was Thursday, September 8th, 2016. I was on a trip from northwest Pennsylvania to visit a friend in North Carolina. I had been driving for about 5.5 hours when I left Route 64, drove onto Airport Road, and came down to a little town called Beaver, West Virginia. I stopped at KFC to grab something to eat, and when I left, I made a right out of the parking lot onto Route 19. I was driving slowly because I had not picked up speed after pulling out. Because I was driving slowly, I am sure I would not have noticed this otherwise. I was approaching some leaves spread across the road when I noticed they were moving, but there was no wind. I slowed down, thinking there might be an animal in the leaves, and I did not want to hit it. I looked hard because I could see the leaves moving, but I could not see an animal. Then I made out a small bipedal figure about 7 or 8 inches tall that seemed to be trying to hide in the leaves. As it tried to cross the road, it looked as if I could see a line around each part of the creature, but it seemed to be cloaked, kind of like what a chameleon does, but not quite the same. It moved with a ratchet-type movement, very jerky. I do not know if that was normal gait or if it was injured. Now, I was driving at a crawl by this time because what I was observing was so bizarre, and I was trying to make sense of it. I kept thinking, what in the world is this thing? It almost looked like a frail stick figure, but I could only make out some of it. I thought maybe it was an emaciated squirrel, but squirrels do not walk on 2 feet. And if it had been that skinny, I would have been dead, not jerking around on the road. It was not a featherless bird either. It reached the center line. It was attempting to cross the rest of the road when a pickup from the other side came speeding along and just missed it with its driver's side tires. I saw the leaves being thrown. I do not know if it made it or not because the cars behind me were honking at me to keep moving. I thought about turning around to see if I could find it because that is what I do for an animal, but this was not an animal, and I never heard or ever heard or seen anything before like that. The more I thought about it, the more I realized it had been cloaked and was taking on the color of the leaves to disguise itself. It reminded me of the cloaked alien in the movie Predator. I could see it, but I could not make out exactly what it was. As I tried to rationalize it, I thought maybe it was a reptile or lizard of some kind, like a chameleon that would change color to hide. An octopus can do the same thing. And maybe we just have never seen them and do not know what they are. So when I arrived at my friend's house that night, I told her about it. She never doubted me, as I am not prone to making up stories. Now, I'm a very rational person. I still wonder what the thing was and if this predator-like entities exist all around us. I contacted the witness and we discussed the incident. Now, during that conversation, she described the shimmering effect that is often associated with the Glimmer Man sightings. I have no definitive explanation for what this cloaked being may have been, but the description of the small stick-like figure is especially interesting. Most Glimmer Man reports involve human-sized or larger figures, often seen in forests or near tree lines. This case is different because of the scale. The entity was described as only 7 to 8 inches tall, bipedal, partially cloaked, and moving in a jerky or mechanical way. The witness's comparison to a chameleon or predator-like cloaking effect is consistent with many reports of translucent or refractive entities. These beings are often described as not fully visible, but visually distorted, like heat shimmer, glass, water, or active camouflage. Now, was this a small animal seen under unusual condition? Possibly. But the witness had time to observe it at slow speed, compare it with several mundane possibilities, and still conclude that it did not match any ordinary creature. Now, the most striking point may be this. She only saw it because she was driving slowly and because the leaves move when there was no wind. Now, she had been moving faster, she would have passed it without even knowing anything was there. And that raises an unsettling question. How often do people pass by things like this and simply never notice? Now, the tiny cloaked figure raises the possibility that anomalous beings may be present around us, hidden in plain sight, noticed only when conditions align perfectly. Now, our final case moves from the roadside to the front door of a private home. It is one of the most disturbing modern paranormal patterns, black-eyed kids. This report comes from Glade Springs, a gated community in southern West Virginia, where a man who awakened at 2:30 in the morning by 2 boys who wanted to come inside. So the witness tells me, I had never heard of the black-eyed kids until I encountered them. Still not knowing who or what they were, I did what any modern young man would do. I Googled them. I was shocked that I was not the only one. Had I not seen them for myself, I would have thought it was just another urban legend gone viral. Besides my girlfriend, I have only told my brother, who is into everything creepy and horror. I am an accountant. My girlfriend and I live in a small gated community in southern West Virginia called Glade Springs. Now, the community has about 150 houses, a country club, and a steakhouse bar called Bunkers. Anyone can come through the gate during business hours, but after they close, the front security gate stops all traffic and verifies their residency. If you are a visitor, they call the house so you can verify that you're expecting them. Sometimes it is a hassle, but you don't have to worry about robbery. So imagine my surprise when my doorbell chimed at 2:30 in the morning. I was jarred awake and not sure if it was a dream, considering I had just gone to bed. I rolled over and looked at the clock, noticing the time. And when my doorbell chimed again, I felt a cold chill run through my body. I tried not to read too much into it. It could have been one of my neighbors having an emergency, right? I made my way to the door and opened it. Luckily, the wrought iron storm door was still locked because whatever stood before me was not a resident of the community. 2 young boys stood at my doorstep. One looked about 17, the other looked about 10. They were wearing dark hooded sweatshirts and jeans. The younger one had a shaggy, dirty blonde hair and only looked down at the stone steps. The older one had his hood pulled up and his head tipped so I could only see him from half his nose down. His voice caught in my throat. My voice caught in my throat, and before I could even ask what they wanted, the older one spoke. His voice sounded forced and dry. There was no emotion or sincerity in what he said. I'm sorry to bother you and your girlfriend, but we need to come in and use your phone. We've been in an accident. I felt the familiar chill return through my whole body. How did he know my girlfriend was there? I wrote it off at first, thinking my Tahoe and her Volkswagen were both in the driveway and they may have assumed it. I tripped over my words. Something about these kids just wasn't right. Not normal, not human. I can bring you my cell phone and you can call. I don't get service inside here, so you have to stand on the sidewalk to call, I said nervously. Now, of course, I was lying through my teeth. I didn't want these kids in the house. Then the older one said, well, my brother really needs to use your bathroom, Chuck. We have to come in. That was when I went into complete panic. He knew my name. I'm sorry, are you from here? How did you know my name? The words shook out of my mouth. That was when I became slightly hostile and demanded to be that's when he became slightly hostile and demanded to be left inside. I told him I was sorry, but I just could not help him. And just as I was about to close the main door, it happened. Both of them snapped their heads upward and looked me straight in the eyes. Black, no irises, no pupils, no retina, just pure deep black. I was paralyzed with fear. For a second, I thought maybe these kids were playing a cruel joke and had snuck in the community somehow wearing those black sclera contacts used in horror movies. That was until I heard the ringing sound, like a sound you hear during a hearing test, a digital high-pitched shrill ringing. Then the flashback started. That was when everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was being shaken awake. I was lying in the mudroom floor. My girlfriend was standing over me with a worried look. What the hell, Chucky? She said. I had no idea how to answer. My head had taken a hard hit against the slate floor, and there was dry blood on my hair, but other than that, I was fine physically. I slowly remembered everything that had happened and looked at the door. Daylight. I had never been so happy to see morning in my life. I told my girlfriend everything that had happened, and I honestly think she thought I had brain damage from hitting the floor, but she insisted that she believed me. Then we Googled it, and I believe that was when she started to realize and started to believe me. I do not know who or what they are or where they came from, but they're not of this world. I know that for a fact. For some reason, I had a lingering thought, and I'm still not sure if they put the thought in my head or not, that they wanted me to know that even my memories are not safe. They are not very strong and seem to be growing in numbers. For some reason, they seem not to be able to hurt you physically unless you invite them in. I don't know if that's true, since either no one has ever let them in or the ones that have are not around to tell the story anymore. But they can get into your mind, and since that night, I feel as though I've been watched. I see them out of the corner of my eye occasionally. I would look at my girlfriend while we're at the movies or at a diner, and her eyes will be solid black for a split second. And worst of all, they took one of my most precious memories and turned it into something sinister, something that is now a constant reminder of black-eyed kids. Now, this is a deeply disturbing report that contains several classic elements of the black-eyed kid encounters. Now, there is a late-night knock at the door, our doorbell. There's a request to come in. There's unusual speech pattern, emotional flatness, escalating insistence. There's a sudden revelation, completely black eyes, and in this case has additional layers. The older boy knew the witness's girlfriend was inside. He also knew the witness's name. The encounter took place in a gated community where strangers should not be able to reach the front door at 2:30 in the morning without explanation. Then there's the high-pitched ringing in the blackout, followed by the witness waking on the floor hours later. The most disturbing part may be the aftermath. The witness believed the entities had affected his memories and continued to intrude into his perception, causing him to see black eyes and others for brief moments afterwards. Whether one interprets black-eyed kids as supernatural entities, psychological projection, interdimensional intruders, modern folklore, or something else entirely, the core pattern remains remarkably consistent. They ask to enter, they create dread, They seem to understand personal details they should not know. And the witness almost always understands at a primal level that letting them in would be a terrible mistake. Now, West Virginia's paranormal history is often reduced to one name, Mothman. But as these reports show, the state's unexplained landscape is much broader and much stranger. In Granttown, a hunter reportedly encountered a green plant-like humanoid that fed on human energy. Near Powton, a huge dark winged figure appeared shortly before a deadly mine train explosion. Near Harpers Ferry, teenagers saw a tall skeletal humanoid standing silently at the edge of a bonfire-lit clearing. In the private hunting woods, a deer seemed to become something else entirely. In the Monongahela backcountry, hikers felt followed, watched, and possibly escorted from the woods. In the high mountain regions, two brothers fled from a towering figure with golden eyes and a scream that followed them all the way back to their vehicle. In the Appalachian borderland, a human-like cry from the woods later seemed to connect to the massive black wolf creature. In Beaver, West Virginia, a driver watched a tiny cloaked figure move through the leaves on the road. And in Glade Springs, two black-eyed children came to a man's door in the middle of the night asking to be let inside. The cases are very different, but there are patterns. The force is often staged. The witness is often isolated, even when others are nearby. Many entities appear at thresholds. The edge of the woods, the side of a road, the front door, the boundary between campfire light and darkness are a thin line between safety and the unknown. Some seem predatory, some seem territorial, some seem curious, some seem like warnings. And some seem to know far more about the witness than they should. That may be the defining character of West Virginia high strangeness. The phenomena does not always behave like random animals or simple ghosts. They often appear with intention, timing, and an emotional force that stays with the witness for years. Maybe the mountains preserve these encounters because the land itself is old. Maybe the ridges, hollows, coalfields, rivers, and abandoned places act as corridors for things that we do not fully understand. Or maybe West Virginia is simply one of those places where the veil is thinner, where the old stories never really left, and where the darkness beyond the tree line still watches back. For now, the answer remains hidden in the mountains. And that's why West Virginia remains one of the most mysterious states in America. This has been Unexplained West Virginia. Now, if you had an unexplained encounter in West Virginia or any place else, please contact me at Phantoms and Monsters. Your report may help identify a pattern that has been hiding in plain sight for years. And as always, thank you for listening. Now, I will take your questions. All caps, please. Marla. Oh, okay. Sir Wolf. Hi, Lon. Have you had reports like from that series, Hellier, underground caves in the Appalachian region with goblin-like cryptids? For the most part, we've had in caves, we've had a couple incidents of humanoid-like creatures, basically like the pale crawler humanoids. I can't remember a goblin-like being, but I do remember several of the pale crawler-like humanoid sightings. And there have been different reactions to them. It's very rarely that they're aggressive, but they are there. And, you know, the witnesses usually do remember them for quite a long time. And occasionally I will get a report come in. Sir Wolf, settlers from Cornwall, England, brought old folklore magic with them to the Appalachian. It has survived there more than here. Is it main reason for how strangers are just added to it? I think it adds to it. You know, the Cornish people who came to Appalachia and up in the upper Midwest, for the most part, were miners. So, and some of the Tommyknocker stories come from the Cornwall people who did come to America. I don't know if it adds to it, and I don't know if it's really part of the actual lore itself. But there are a lot of stories that come out of those communities. Dagnammit, the Flatwoods Monster also seen in West Virginia in 1953. Yes, it was. And we still don't know what it was. Was it a UFO? Was it an alien being? We have no idea. Jan's Roost. What does the vegetable man look like? Well, it looked like it was a walking humanoid that had vegetable-like characteristics to it. It was green. It had needle-like fingers. It had a head, supposedly, that looked like maybe a vegetable itself. But that was the description. I have looked for other similar reports, and I haven't found any anywhere. So we honestly don't know what it was. Dagnammit, has there been any Mothman sightings lately in West Virginia? Lately? No. I have received reports from people who maybe saw one or saw something similar. I think the last one I had was on the Seneca Highway, where one of my clients had an encounter, but that was about 10 years ago. There have been few small reports, but not in or around Point Pleasant. Most of them do run up and down the Ohio River Valley on both sides. So I've had them in Ohio, in Kentucky, and I've had them in West Virginia. And as far north as up into Pennsylvania, up into near the Pittsburgh area. Anything else? Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for listening and participating in the chat. If you provided a donation, I truly appreciate it. Please like, subscribe, and share. And Wednesday, this coming Wednesday on the 10th at 9:00 p.m. Eastern, there will be an Ask Lon session for members. You can become a member. Go to the channel. It's only $2.99 a month, and become a member, and you can stay on there and ask me any question you want about what I do, my work, and anything else that comes to your mind. So until the next time we meet, just stay aware, trust your instincts, and remember, sometimes the strangest places are not that far away. Have a nice Friday evening. Have a great weekend. See you next Friday or Wednesday. Good night.